Metacognition is the ability to step back and watch your own mind at work. And we'll be fully covering it within this video. The thing is, you can know a lot, but still be terrible at thinking. You might know the right information, but if you're not aware of the processes by which you're using it, you will continue to make the same mistakes. Often, we're not aware of how we're thinking about a particular idea, situation, or decision. We simply think, for instance, that we have solved a problem and made a good decision, or even reacted appropriately, and then we just move on. Rarely do we ever stop and ask ourselves, wait, why did I think about it this way that I did? This thinking about your own thinking is what we can call metacognition, and it may be one of the most valuable cognitive skills that you can develop because it changes the way that you think about everything that you know. Quick thing before we start though, we're running intelligence competitions within our Discord server, built around the same exact skills in this video. Links in the description. Now, let's get into it. Metacognition is simply thinking about thinking, specifically stepping outside the process to observe, evaluate, and direct your own thinking. It's not about thinking harder or even thinking more. By fostering metacognition, or this awareness, you'll be able to recognize gaps within your own knowledge more easily, adjust strategies, but most importantly, gain more satiety from the information that you currently know. You can have all the information that you need right in front of you, but without the critical thinking framework of metacognition, it could lose immense value and your own ability to utilize it. The payoff for developing metacognition is one of the greatest because it applies universally to almost everything that you want to do in your life. It compounds tremendously as well, as every mistake that you learn from using this becomes information to help develop approaches to future events and endeavors. An analysis covering nearly 50 studies and close to 6,000 participants found that training people specifically in metacognitive strategies, planning, monitoring, adjusting, produced some of the strongest measurable improvements in academic performance out of every learning strategy tested, outperforming general study techniques and even motivation-based interventions. The data supports what the compounding effect predicts. The skill of managing your own learning processes outperforms just knowing more content. And in this video, we'll be using John Flavel's framework to outline the structure of metacognition itself, and then we'll get into the intricacies of each category. Flavel is the person who developed the term metacognition, by the way, and his framework is still quite valid towards mapping what it is actually today. He splits metacognition specifically into two components. The first is metacognitive knowledge, which is what you want to understand about how your own mind works. The second is metacognitive regulation, which is what you do with that understanding, and other things like planning beforehand, monitoring, and adjusting after events. Everything we go into this video will help elaborate on that system and apply it to different domains, and how to improve them using exercises and lifestyle changes. The first section will cover metacognition for thinking. It's the act of observing and directing your own use of the different categories of thinking that we covered before, and knowing which mode of thinking you are using, whether it be critical thinking, abstract, convergent, holistic, etc. Every mind automatically uses one or two forms of thinking by habit. You've probably spent years using the same mode of thinking without even questioning if it fits the problem in front of you. We can use metacognition to analyze these behaviors and interrupt those habits, allowing us to get a better grasp of the tools that we have to solve problems in general. There's three different types of knowledges developed by Flavel regarding awareness, and we can use that metacognition on all three. The first type of knowledge we can analyze is person knowledge. Person knowledge is understanding your own thinking tendencies, so which of the different forms of thinking that you use, and which you tend to avoid. For example, someone who tends to lean on critical thinking will pick apart every claim that they hear, but whenever asked to generate something new, they might be a bit slower, because now that gets into abstract or divergent thinking territory, which they might have not developed if it's their nature. A good example of this is Yuichi from Tomodachi Game. He's not much smarter than the people around him, but he knows the moments where he has to read others and when his predictions might be wrong, like under social pressure or when someone's deliberately being kind to him. Aside from fiction, we can refer to research from Kruger and Dunning, which found that some people's self-assessment accuracy tracks their own skill levels within domains. Lower performers consistently overestimate their own ability, while higher performers tend to slightly underestimate theirs. The pattern we can use from this is that The lack of skill also comes with the lack of ability to properly analyze the situation and their own abilities regarding it. So, a great practice to counter this is going to someone who has more experience than you and is in a position that you like to get to, and ask them for advice concerning your situation. Flavel's own interviews make the underlying point simple, essentially that this kind of self-knowledge develops gradually, but a lot of adults never finish the process. It's actually pretty funny because they know that they are able to describe how other people think in detail, but have no clue of how their own minds work or anything regarding their own patterns. Mostly because criticism outwards is easy, but scrutiny towards the self is a separate skill that must be trained. The next type of knowledge is task knowledge. Task knowledge is recognizing what a given problem demands before you commit to a way that you will approach that problem. A lot of the issues that people have regarding this component isn't actually from the lack of ability, but applying the right mindset to an instance or moment that isn't the most suitable. A method that works for a well-defined, repeatable problem will slow you down on a problem that's still ambiguous, because you end up forcing structure onto something that doesn't have a shape yet. So it's specifically knowing what works in certain tasks and what doesn't by analyzing the demand of the task itself. It's confusing, I know, so let me elaborate a bit more on it. Think about studying for two different types of tests. One is memorizing vocabulary for a language exam. It's simple and repeatable. The answers are fixed, so repetition and drills work. But writing an essay response to an open-ended prompt is completely different, so you can't just use the first method of studying. Most people study the same way for everything, and never give it much thought. So improving awareness of what tasks require different methods specifically is what we refer to task knowledge. The last type of knowledge from Flavel's system is strategy knowledge. Strategy knowledge is knowing which approach solves which types of problems, and having more than one option built when the first plan doesn't work. Strategy knowledge is probably the slowest to develop, but there isn't much you can actually do about it. You can develop your awareness of yourself by paying closer attention over time, and you can develop understanding of a task just by studying it before you do it. But for a strategy, you can only navigate through experiences clumsily until you get a decent understanding or experience to develop awareness of those events. Take someone who's developed their entire style around confidence and energy, and then put that person in front of an audience that doesn't rely on pathos and values logos. That person will most likely fail horribly, especially in areas of debate. They knew that what they would be going into was something else, but intuitively, they can't grasp the experience or the energy of the room before going into it. There's one habit that develops all three of these knowledges at the same time, which is just having a piece of paper with 3 questions written on it. These consist of 1. What actions did I default to here through my nature? 2. Did that default match what the situation required or needed? And then 3. If it didn't, what else could I have done instead? So not only does this force you to take accountability for your losses, but it avoids the effect of looking in hindsight with confidence, which most people do, and it limits their ability to actually develop dramatically with that. So the more that you step back from the thinking itself and just observe the I or the self in these scenarios, the more your general metacognition will improve, and eventually it'll develop itself naturally. And there might come a time where you have to use metacognition for metacognition, but we'll get into that later, as now we're going to transition into metacognition for emotions. Metacognition for emotion revolves around the same system, but as you guessed it, now we're observing your own emotional responses and tendencies. This encompasses feelings and the actions that occur through or upon that feeling. Emotions are completely different because with thoughts you can observe them as they are more conscious, but we can observe with more unconscious processes that it's a bit more difficult to utilize and manage due to their abstract nature. Emotions also occur before you even observe them, so when you're aware of them, they've already begun. Most people can actually formulate metacognition about their thought processes, but never their emotions. For emotion, we can split this category into 3 different components as well, which include recognition, interpreting, and regulation. So the first aspect that we will cover is emotional recognition, which is the act of catching emotions that appear and catching it early enough to deal with. It sounds like an obvious thing. Everyone notices when they're angry or anxious, but the skill revolves around being aware early. This is a bit harder than recognizing your thoughts because thoughts happen closer to conscious awareness, like mentioned earlier, which means that you can observe thoughts mid-formation, and arguably during formation, depending on how you view readiness potential. An emotion starts as a physical response first, a shift in your body, things like tension, heat, and a change in your breathing, well before it becomes a labeled feeling within your mind. This can be backed up with research as well, as in a controlled trial, a group went through a short training program built to improve people's readability and their ability to detect internal body signals like their own heartbeat, while another group did not receive that training. The trained group showed more measurable improvement to detecting the signals and scored higher on separate measures of awareness regarding the negative emotional states. So there's a physical side along with an emotional side. For training this emotional side, it's similar to the physical conditioning, which is repetition and consistent training. Widening your emotional vocabulary and journaling these states can also help by a lot. The reason I say emotional vocab is because a lot of people classify emotions into simple things like sadness, being stressed, or they're fine, etc. But in reality, it's much more complex, and the more that you can understand your emotions, the more that you can deal with them. And the next component, which is interpretation or interpreting. People think that as soon as you classify an emotion, you can deal with it. But the problem with this approach is that you skip over a lot of important facets, specifically the causes for these emotions. That's why we'll get into emotional interpretation, which is the metacognitive process that allows you to trace recognized emotions to its actual source. To do this, we use archetypes, symbols, and the question of why to dive deepest into these root causes. Carl Jung's framing using archetypes is useful as they are forms that represent how you interact and respond to recurring situations, things like loss, threat, belonging, etc. For example, we can use the orphan archetype, which is based on abandonment or the sense of being left to fend for yourself. Someone that has an imbalanced version of this doesn't need an actual abandonment trigger to trigger the archetype, but something just close enough to trigger it, like a friend canceling a plan at the last minute. If you observe these patterns and symbols within you, you can start to develop reasoning for why you may perform certain actions that aren't favorable to your position. This is where the question of why has to be applied, as the first answer to these emotions isn't usually the first one. Take it in steps. So, using the example from before, ask, why did the canceled plans hurt this much? And then you can answer something like, because I was looking forward to it. Okay, and then why does that hurt so much? And then you can answer, because it felt like being chosen against. And then you ask again, why does that specific feeling go this deep within my psyche? And you answer, because it's happened before with people who mattered more. So the first answer stays inside the event that you're dealing with, but the more that you go backwards using the why, you start to realize the root causes and the original causes of your own actions. So you're basically digging into your unconscious mind because the responses come from the unconscious. So we'll go more into the archetypes and how to utilize them in a future video. But for now, the process of why should be sufficient enough to get into the final component, which is emotional regulation. This is the metacognitive process of choosing how to respond to emotions and tracing it back to its original source. I advise you highly not to skip interpretation because regulation without accurate interpretation might cause you to manage everything improperly. Psychologist James Gross conducted a series of studies comparing people who tend to suppress their emotions against people who tend to reappraise them, meaning that they actively reinterpret the situation rather than just masking their reaction. People who suppress emotions consistently experienced more negative emotion overall, while people who reappraise experienced more positive emotions and less negative emotions. This is trainable in the same way that the first two are, which is, again, small consistent steps. Reappraisal comes down to just generating a second interpretation of the same event, with the goal being to rewrite the events and perception of the event. So, if we use the example from before, a friend canceling plans might mean rejection, or it can mean something that has nothing to do with you. Both are possible, but only one is negative, and it's up to you whether you want to live with the negative reality or the neutral reality. Now, everything we covered so far has been split into two domains, emotion and thinking. But underneath both of them lies the same foundation, which is simply just stepping outside of an ongoing process and being aware of it. That awareness itself is trainable and is what we will refer to as fire, comparable to the flame from esoteric symbolism, most famously in Initiates of the Flame from Manly P. Hall, which he refers to as awareness in, reciprocity. The best way to foster this fire or awareness is to build a habit reflecting on your actions daily. Simple things like 5-minute journaling every day. And externalizing your thinking is also very useful. Things like writing down thoughts or even talking out loud to yourself. This forces the process outside of your head and makes it take shape into something that you can actually analyze. And then once you're able to analyze it, then obviously you can go into adapting to situations regarding that concept. Now, the self-observation has its own limits. Getting someone else, like mentioned before, is very important because with more experience, they can reach your blind spots quicker than you, which will expedite progress and growth. Finally, accepting the process never ends, as it's extremely important to continue it. Person knowledge, task knowledge, and strategy knowledge all change and shift as you as a person change and develop. The same is true for recognition, interpretation, and regulation for emotions. You as a person constantly change, and the way that you view the world will constantly change as well. So eventually over time, those interpretations and analysis that you have on yourself will get outdated. So they'll constantly need revision due to that fact. So this is a process that you do your entire life. So, every once in a while, you're going to have to come back to this. So I recommend that you just keep it within your own mind. Keep it somewhere that you can analyze these patterns and tendencies and make a reminder to yourself, at least every day. Like put on your phone like a reminder, do a bit of journaling, and this will definitely help you improve and foster your awareness of yourself. And that's really it for today. If you like the video, make sure to like and comment and let me know your thoughts. We'll be covering emotional intelligence next, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Take care.